and welcome back to BHookedCrochet.com. I'm your host Brittany, and in this tutorial I'm going to demonstrate how to crochet the Tunisian simple stitch. This is a foundation stitch if you're learning how to do Tunisian crochet, and we're going to be working up a little demo swatch to learn this stitch. As I mentioned, we're just going to be working up a test swatch for this tutorial, and I'll also talk about how you might turn this stitch into some sort of project, because you're going to want to try something out with this stitch in order to really solidify your understanding of this stitch and progress to other stitches with Tunisian crochet. Now I'm just going to be working with a worsted or a medium weight yarn. I have here a size 6mm Tunisian crochet hook. These are Addy click hooks. And the first thing we want to do is create a slip knot. And the beginning of Tunisian crochet is very similar to what we would do for our normal crochet. We still need a foundation chain. So for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to chain up 15. Now when you have your 15 chains, you're going to just take a look at your work here, and we're going to skip the very last chain that we made. And then we're going to insert our hook into the second chain from the hook. Now you can go in any one of the loops. I've just gone here in the top loop. You can go in the back bar, whatever you're comfortable with. And yarn over and pull a loop through that chain. And then we're going to leave that loop on our hook. Now insert your hook into the next chain, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And we're going to repeat that. And as you're working these loops onto your hook, the one thing that you want to be certain of is that you're making your loops kind of loose. See how effortless it is for me to move my hook around? So the loops are just sliding over and I don't have to put any muscle behind it. And that's the objective here. We want to keep our stitches as loose as possible for a couple reasons. One is because Tunisian crochet has a tendency to curl, and the looser your stitches are, the less obvious that curl is going to be. The other reason why you want to keep your stitches loose is because it's going to make this a much more enjoyable process. If you find yourself working against your tension and against your yarn, you're going to end up with uneven stitches and probably a little bit of frustration. Now I've made it to my very last chain. We'll treat that the same. Now we should have all of our loops worked onto our Tunisian crochet stitch. And this is the first half of our row. So Tunisian crochet, you have a forward pass, which is what we just did because we were crocheting in the forward direction. Now we're going to have a backward pass, and that's where, of course, we're going to be working these loops off of our hook. So beginning the backward pass, we're always going to, at this point here, yarn over and pull through just that first loop. And one thing I would recommend at this point, if you have a stitch marker handy, go ahead and place your stitch marker in that little chain that we just made. That's going to make our life a whole lot easier when we get back around, because we're going to have to work our final stitch into that loop. Now for the remaining stitches, or the remaining loops on our hook, we're just going to yarn over and pull through 2. Now yarn over and pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2, and just repeat that. Now when you just have 2 remaining loops on your hook, you'll again yarn over, pull through both of those, and then you should just be left with 1 loop on your hook. Now to start off the second row, we're going to be working in these little bars that we see going in this direction. So we're always going to skip this first bar here. That's where our working yarn is coming from, and if we were to insert our hook into this chain and pull up a loop, we'd really just undo this stitch. So we don't want to do that. You'll find your next bar and just slip your hook right underneath that. Then yarn over and pull up a loop. Now leave that loop on your hook and repeat. This is actually the same motions that we did when we were working in our foundation chain. The only difference here is that we have stitches now to work into. So when you've made it to your stitch marker, that's supposed to let you know that that is your very last stitch to work. So you can just place your hook directly under that last loop, yarn over, and pull up a loop. Then you can remove that stitch marker. And that completes the forward pass on the second row. So what we want to do from here is exactly the same as before. We're going to yarn over, pull through just that first loop, and then add your stitch marker again. Again, that's optional if you're having a little trouble with your edges. And now we'll just yarn over and pull through 2 all the way back. It's very important that when you're doing this part, you're watching your stitches, because if you pull through more than 2, then you're going to end up decreasing your number of stitches. Now let's say you have an incident where you're not paying attention and you pull through 3. And you can see that there by watching your working yarn. You can see that there are 3 loops on your hook. So this happens a lot of times if you get distracted or if you're just not looking at your work. So what I recommend doing when this happens to you is just carefully take your hook back and put it in the loop that you don't want it to be worked into. And then you're just going to shift it over and just leave it on your hook. So now you can see we just have 2 loops over our working yarn and our disaster has been averted. Now that finishes up our second row, and as I work through this third row, I'm going to talk about what you can do with this stitch. And now that you have learned it, you really want to put it into practice. So you're going to want to start some kind of project, and you're going to want to do something relatively simple so that you can practice this stitch. And then the Tunisian simple stitch is the best stitch to start out with when you're learning Tunisian crochet, because it is, as the name implies, very simple. But it gets you used to the motions of Tunisian crochet, which are quite different from what you're probably used to. So the main project that I recommend using the Tunisian simple stitch is some kind of scarf or cowl. Now it gives you a lot of practice because you're going to want to make your scarf relatively long. So it's going to give you a lot of practice, and it's going to be easy at the same time because you're just going to be doing what we're doing here. Just forward pass and backward pass. You don't really have to think very much about the pattern. There's not a whole lot of designing involved. Now depending on the type of yarn that you're working with, and keep in mind you can do Tunisian crochet in all types of yarn, all weights of yarn. Now at the beginning I would probably avoid working with a novelty yarn, something that's really fuzzy or doesn't have very good what we call stitch definition, because you want to make sure you can see these bars that you're working into. That's going to be really important. It's going to prevent you from increasing or decreasing. And so you want to choose a yarn that's something like I'm working with here, just a worsted weight, something smooth and easy to work with. Once you have chosen your yarn, I would recommend, depending on the type of scarf you like, I would probably at least double this width. So here I'm working with a worsted weight and a 6mm hook, and this is the gauge that I'm obtaining. So I have a little swatch that's about 3.5 inches wide. But if I were making a scarf, I would want it to be at least 6 inches wide. So when I would start off my foundation chain, I would at least double the number of chains that we started with. So for example, I would probably start off with 30 chains. And then you can look at that width and see if it's something that would work for a scarf. If so, then you're just going to repeat the steps that we have covered here in this tutorial. Another good project for Tunisian crochet, something that would be quicker than a scarf, would be a washcloth or maybe a kitchen towel. So for that, I would choose some kind of cotton yarn, something that is washer and dryer friendly. And you would work it the same way. You'd create your foundation chain depending on how big you would like it to be. And then you would just work the steps that we covered here until your washcloth or towel or whatever it is you're working on is the proper size. The last thing that we're going to cover is very important, is how to finish things off. It's a little bit different than what we would do for regular crochet, of course. And so when you find yourself at the end of your backward pass, you just have the one loop on your hook. This is the position you want to be in when you're ready to finish off whatever it is that you're working. The way that we do that is kind of similar to what we do when we're working the stitches. We're going to insert our hook into the loop, yarn over, and pull up a loop. But the part where it's different is we're going to pull this loop here through this loop. And then we're just going to repeat. And once you've made it through that last stitch, it's at this point where you can cut your yarn and finish binding off from there. So just how you normally would. And so that's a quick little demonstration on the Tunisian simple stitch. It sort of has this boxed appearance. It's a really cool stitch, and in my opinion it makes a really awesome scarf. So choose a project for yourself to work on to practice this stitch and finish getting the hang of Tunisian crochet. So September of 2016 is Tunisian Crochet Month at B.Hooked Crochet. So you'll find this tutorial. Once you master this stitch, I would recommend checking out the Knit Alike scarf. It's a really cool pattern that I just released, and you can find that at bhookedcrochet.com/knitalikescarf.